So hi and welcome to the fourth edition of our Harsh Light webinars. My name's Dave. I'm the director of Bloc Projects. My preferred pronouns are he and him. I'm currently wearing a black top. I have dark glasses and short blonde hair. So I'm just going to do a little bit of an intro, a little bit of housekeeping, and just to explain the format in a little bit more detail before I pass over to my colleague Sunshine, who is going to introduce today's session. So what we're asking for people, Sunshine, a little wave there. What we're asking people to do is, for the best viewing experience for today, is to turn your Zoom platform to gallery view. So you can toggle between gallery view and speaker view just by clicking in the icon in the top right-hand corner. The gallery view will allow you to have a tile for each speaker, and we're going to keep the speakers' cameras on and microphones on, as well as the BSL interpreters. We're just asking people to remain muted with their cameras off for the duration of the session today, just to keep the viewing experience a little bit more succinct, but also to allow the BSL interpreters to be visible throughout. So just to introduce the amazing BSL interpreters we've got today. So we've got Vicky and Catherine. So you can see Catherine on the screen at the moment. Vicky and Catherine will be passing over to one another throughout the session today. Before I pass over to my colleague, Sunshine, I'm just going to explain the format a little bit more. So Sunshine will introduce the session and then pass on to the speakers, Priya and Amrita. We will have the discussion until about 7:40, where we'll stop for a short 10-minute break just to allow everybody to decompress a little bit. We'll come back after 10 minutes and we'll continue the conversation, and then there'll be an opportunity at the end to ask questions. What we really want to encourage people to do is to use the chat function as part of this webinar to ask questions, contribute to the conversation around the conversation between Priya, Amrita and Sunshine. And what we'll be doing is we'll be monitoring that, and we'll be pulling out questions that can be posed towards the end. If anybody would prefer asking a question in person, turning their cameras on and unmuting themselves, just pop it in the chat and we can make sure we accommodate some time for that. Similarly, if anybody wanted to sign a question in the same way, just pop something in the chat and we'll be able to accommodate some time towards the end to be able to sign any questions. Last couple of things, we are recording this session and it will be available on our website in the coming days. If anybody has any concerns about that or any comments, feel free to get in touch with us at the end and we'll be able to share the email address. It's just the info email address, which you can access through our website or through Eventbrite. And finally, what we'll do towards the end of the conversation within the chat, we'll put a little link into a really short feedback form. I know everybody's probably feeling very overwhelmed by evaluations and feedback forms at the moment, but we'd really, really appreciate if people were able to take 30 seconds just to fill that in. These 3 sessions that we're delivering throughout December have been really heavily informed by the feedback that we generously received from people who are attending the first 3 sessions we delivered in September. So just taking a little bit of time to do that is much appreciated. And we'll follow this session up with an email with the link to the feedback form as well. I think that's possibly everything. So without further ado, I'm going to pass you over to Sunshine.
Thanks there, Dave. Yeah, hi. I'm Sunshine. I'm the public program coordinator at Bloc Projects. My pronouns are she and her. And a little visual description of myself. I'm Chinese. I have a fringe. My hair is in a ponytail and I'm wearing a scarf and a jumper because it's pretty cold in this room. Yeah, we are super excited and humbled to host this December installment of Harsh Light. And this online platform, Zoom, has basically been our only gathering space for the last 9 months. So we also understand that you're taking some time out of your day to come on here, and the screen has been like a really significant part of our work and lives. And so when we say thank you for coming, we really do mean it, because it's yeah, taking this time out of your day when you could be resting means a lot to us. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of context about Harsh Light. And what it is seems to change every time I describe it. This is our 4th session. And yeah, as Dave said, we've been taking into account our publics and our artists' feedback a lot. And I think that's part of why it changes every time I try to describe it. But at the moment, I want to say that harsh life is harsh life. Harsh light is a self-reflexive space for the arts to ask, how are we feeling about things? And this question carries with it criticality, care, mutuality, and checking in. And when I think back to the webinars that we've had so far, they've all more or less started from this question of how things feel in the arts currently. So for instance, when Jade and of Black Curators Collective talked about inclusivity in the arts, they emphasized the emotional work that's involved. And when climate activists and artists, Angela Chan and Farah Ahmed, reframed what it means to be sustainable, they foregrounded commitment and the building of trust between commissioners and publics and artists, and that in itself basically is also emotional work. And finally, Action Space described how they negotiate personal and professional support for artists with complex learning needs. And that's also down to feeling things out in a really critical way, especially when words or verbalizing isn't an option. So in this spirit, we are really honored to have some great feelers speaking today and in the next couple of sessions of Harsh Light. But before I introduce Amrita and Priya, I'd like to invite us to take a moment to drop in and take our own temperature in a very short body-centered exercise. So we do this for all our Harsh Light sessions as an attempt to remember our body when our experiences currently feel so flattened by these screens. So hopefully it sets the tone as well for a more open and emotionally and critically attuned conversation as well. So if you've got your videos turned on, you're welcome to turn them off. I'm speaking particularly about the speakers. If you want to turn them off, that's fine. But if you also don't want to take part, that's totally fine as well. And you can tune back in a couple of minutes. And yeah, so for today's exercise, I'd like to focus on that question of how we're feeling. So I'm going to invite you to stand up and get comfortable. Hand your arms by your side loosely. Probably just keep your feet a little bit apart and shift your weight to your toes and to the heels until you feel a sense of grounding. And keep your gaze soft. Look around the room and look for an object that you can just focus on. I'm going to try and find something that I can put in front of me. Ideally, something that's not overly stimulating. Just an ordinary everyday object is fine. And just observe its contours. Does it look rough or smooth? Heavy or light? Is it something that you can hold in your hands or a cradle? Is it a delicate object? Or is it something that's pretty heavy and it has to stand on its own elsewhere? So just observe these things and take a moment. Don't have to make any judgments about them. And similarly, in that kind of non-judgmental, observational way, turn inward and tap into how you're feeling at the moment. And ask yourself those same questions. What are the contours? Does it feel rough or smooth, cold, hot? Maybe small or big? Delicate, heavy? And just observe. Taking a moment. You can close your eyes if that helps. You don't have to. Maybe giving it a color, a shape. And once you've done that, Let's just take a couple of deep breaths and then we can come back to our seats. I like to focus on kind of my chest area around my heart, giving it space. Okay. Hope that's helped. So I'm just gonna start. Yeah, actually, I forgot to introduce Amrita and Priya, so I'll do that quickly. Amrita is a curator and researcher based in London. She provides support structures for emerging British artists through commissioning, creating artistic networks, and establishing intergenerational learning spaces. Her current research examines care, healing, and ethno-futurist discourse within arts education and exhibition making. Priya writes, produces, and facilitates. Her research interests are broadly in embodied knowledge, technologies of enchantment, and cracks in the archives. Priya's recent work has centered grief, happiness, and care work. So in this first part of the conversation, Amrita and Priya will be setting the scene to talk about their ongoing project, Maybitude, which places embodiment at the center of their practices. So they'll talk about how they met, the overlapping and interweaving of their work and lives, and lay out some key concerns to their project, which they'll talk about in greater detail in the second part. So thank you, Priya, and thank you, Amrita.
Thank you, Sunshine. So, hi everyone. My name's Amrita. Quick visual description. I'm Indian, I have glasses, red lips, pastel pink jumper, and my pronouns are she, her. And maybe Priya, you should do a quick description before we continue.
I'm Priya, also Indian. My hair is in a low bun. I'm wearing gold hoops. I have 2 gold studs in my nose. My pronouns are she, her. I'm wearing a black top and the background is white.
So yeah, before we begin today, I just want to thank everyone for joining us. As Sunshine said, we really appreciate it. There's not only other events happening tonight, but also, you know, it is quite tiring to be staying on the screens after working days and whatnot. So we really appreciate it. And I also just wanted to express my gratitude to Bloc Projects for having us, Sunshine for helping us to hold this space, and also our interpreters today as well. We really appreciate all the care you put into making this event happen. And I also wanted to express gratitude to Priya for agreeing to join me tonight to be my interlocutor. Yeah, like Priya and I have known each other for a number of years now, and I think it's fair to say that we met each other at, I guess, the beginning stages of our artistic practices. And this is the first time that we've actually been given a public opportunity to have a conversation about our research interests and how they have now actually met for us to start collaborating in a more, I guess, rigorous way. And, but, you know, up until this point, we've been having so many conversations, and with the art world serving as a backdrop, but not the be-all and end-all of our creative conversations, but they've often really meandered to this mutual respect that we have for the body as a place of knowledge, memory, and action. And that body can be an individual body, physical body, spiritual body, but also the collective body as well. You know, we've spoken about, you know, essential oils, meditations, plant allies, crystals, but also to, you know, the emotions and the feelings that we want to feel when we enter into an artistic and a discursive space. And yeah, we've been creative collaborators in a number of different capacities, maybe not in a conventional way, because we haven't produced anything that's, you know, public facing. There's not really you know, an object that's come out of our well, first and foremost, we're friends. I would go, you know, as far to say as you're one of my closest friends, and maybe it's the first time I've compared it to you, and you might not feel the same way.
I'm just here for the public declarations of love.
You know, I'm just gonna put my feelings out there today. This is what I'm gonna do. It's gonna be a gush fest, and it's okay. But also, yeah, so that's friends first and foremost. But we're also each other's champions. We also have helped each other along the way with job applications and interview prep and funding applications and research applications. We're also each other's critics, and by that I mean that in the most loving and supportive way. We feed into each other's research, and we also push each other rather in the creative discourse that we each are working to develop. And we also encourage each other to stay grounded, to stay true to ourselves and to our roots, and to really listen to our bodies. And so I think we have kind of come together because we both really prioritize what it means to build an embodied practice, not just in a curatorial practice, but in a wider creative practice. And I think we both are seeking to expand what it means to curate, and we're not really satisfied with an institutional, I guess, set of frameworks for curating, and curating not necessarily just as exhibition making, but something bigger than that. And yeah, and so we've really been there for one another as we've developed the foundations for our practices. And I think one thing that is quite pertinent in our creative alignment is the fact that we, you know, have a deep interest in ecologies of care, but at the same time we've had that realization about our work. We've also witnessed how the term care has been depoliticized by our institutions, and this has only really, you know, been exacerbated over the past years. And it really has felt quite dissonant to the emergent and generative forms of community and collaboration that not only we, but our mentors, our peers, and our community have been striving towards. So the first half of this discussion, and for our own reference, we entitled it as "The Body is the Ground of Thought," and we'll unpack this reference further. But we'll talk about how we first met, the various other spaces we've encountered, and also with each other, and how we've mentored each other, but also our separate research questions, particularly thinking about ideas around repair, further, creative practice as a gesture of the body, and also alternative modes of testimony. And in the second half, we'll speak about how those separate questions have kind of met each other over the past few months to help us towards expanding what curating can be, and towards our very fresh and hopefully long-term collaboration called Maybetude. And I think, you know, all of this opportunity to have this conversation is going to serve for us a very, you know, really helpful actually in our next stage in our collective research, because our approach to curatorial work has always been very collaborative and dialogic, and informal conversations has always served the basis of how we share knowledge. And so I think it's also quite exciting to potentially include you all in this process to kind of help us think further in this process. And yeah, this opportunity has really prompted us to think about transcribing these exchanges in order to perhaps develop a communal archive on the subject of curating as a gesture of the body. And at a time when our bodies feel so disconnected from one another, you know, we really want to center intimacy and abundant possibilities. So today we're going to use this conversation as an opportunity to think aloud together, to visualize new ecologies of support and creativity with one another. And we hope that you all will feel comfortable to think aloud with us. So yeah, so I really wanted to talk and also start the conversation with, what do you think really drew us together? Oh God, this sounds so romantic. But yeah, like you know, how we first met and the first kinds of conversations we had. I think from my perspective, what I've appreciated about our friendship, especially because it came at a time when we're both emerging curators. I kind of still feel emerging, but you know, I could ask more of the structures that I was operating in, because you were asking those same questions too. So for example, as I mentioned earlier, like, neither of us are really satisfied with the institutional definition or institutional practices of curating and facilitating and programming. And because you were experiencing it too, I could, you know, keep asking the question, well, surely this isn't it. Surely this is not all that is possible to do. And I feel like, you know, when we first met, and we're still doing this through our conversations, like we're resisting a lot of influences from the art establishment, particularly in relation to pace, particularly in relation to, you know, what we were witnessing as a lack of care in a very basic way to one another, for one another as bodies in the space. Yeah, I don't know whether you had any opening thoughts.
I was just thinking back to the time that we first met, and it was in South London Galleries garden, and I was just thinking about the fact that it was just in like an outside space. It was like in an in-between outside space where there was food involved. I'm pretty sure there was some sort of music involved. We were just sitting on the steps outside of the gallery itself. And I feel like even that type of orientation kind of like led to just the intimate conversations that we were able to have, and like also the discontents that we were able to express to each other, that it wasn't within the four walls of the institution that we met. It was always in these like passing outside moments, and so much of the time that's where the sweetest, most nourishing conversations I've had are. So yeah, I think the fact that we were both on parallel streams of thought. I had my own situation at the time, thinking about whether I was qualified enough to exist in the art world anyway. So just having a peer and someone to think aloud with was really important at that point.
And you know, we and then once we sort of started moving and, you know, progressing, but not like in a rational way kind of thing, but like moving forward with our practices, we also entered into a peer network space as well. So Priya and I are also part of like a peer-to-peer mentoring network, which was supported by an Arts Quest initiative called Peer Forum, but it's something that we still continue to this day. And now we've rebranded ourselves as Peer Forum. The bootleg version of Peer Forum. But again, like I think that was like at the time, and it still is a very, very important support space for one another. And it's not just us two, there's 10 other members, and we are, you know, writers, artists, educators, you know, thinkers, and many different forms. And I think it was quite interesting to then take our conversations into, and feelers, I like that, into a more interdisciplinary space where with other people who can help us like shape that. And again, this question, I think, of pace really came into the forefront at that point as well, because we were all resisting, you know, being in contact with one another with the, you know, with the view to collaborate and actually, you know, create something public facing, but we were actually just there to sit around a table and talk about our grief with the art world, talk about our actual grief that happened to me at one point. We also had mentors that came in to give us feedback, and we had held really safe crits with one another as well. I don't know whether at all you had any reflections on that experience, and you know, how that kind of helped with your practice, and also how you were experiencing the institution at the time as well.
Yeah,
and
well, I really go on.
Whether, you know, whether it was actually like a love, like it was important to have that supportive space outside of an institutional space.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I felt like it was a really loving gesture to be involved in that. And I mean, you sent off the application and called me into that type of space, and it was the first time that I had properly been around just a group of emerging. I feel like I'm always emerging anyway, and that's the position that I actually now want to hold, is emergent, as something that's always changing. But a group of people who were curating, making art, just thinking, and there was just a space to kind of have snacks together. You can see that the running thread for me is that food is involved. I feel like that's when I feel safe and looked after and ready to chat. But I think that space was really important to me. And I remember it was because I hadn't been to art school or anything, so the idea of doing a crit was very new to me. So framing my own thoughts as a practice was first done in that type of space, and it was like a room that felt like it had no hierarchy as well, so I could leave whatever imposter syndrome that I had at the door. And I remember my first, like when I was introducing myself and my practice and like what I'm doing, I was unemployed at the time, and a lot of my work, my labor, was care work for my grandparents, specifically my grandma. And I remember it was the first time that I named in that space that, no, this is what I'm doing, and the work that I'm doing is staying hydrated and getting enough sleep and eating good. And other than that, I don't really have that much time in the day, other than that and being with my grandma, and also processing my grief. So that was the first point where I started to like name that as my foremost priority, and as a valid and relevant point of departure and arrival.
And I think also, like, one thing that we've discussed in relation to like the importance of holding space in many different capacities, and this, you know, and a peer network, mentoring network either, is important in relation to that. And in your specific creative practice, facilitation is essential, but also, like, as an observer just looking in, actually feels like it takes precedence above a lot of other things in your approach. And I was just wondering, it's like, you know, for example, recently you've been facilitating grief circles, and obviously without going into too much detail, I'm just curious as to, you know, firstly, why that takes precedence. Is that like a real choice that you've made, or does that happen naturally? Also, what have you learned from those experiences, and why for you is it actually more important to hold space? Is this something related to the moment that we find ourselves in now, rather than creating outward facing content, or I don't know, something else?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. I feel, yeah, it feels like such a nice question to be asked by a friend who has seen me through these waves. But I've been either floating on or consumed by grief for a few years, and I almost feel like I've been holding space for my family and almost doing workshop type things in my own family space. I think I was the only person that was naming death and naming grief, and I think I started to gain practice in holding space and listening and bearing witness first and foremost in my home environment. And just the different textures of grief and the different types of grief. And then a friend that a really close friend of mine worked at an organization called Fevered Sleep. And David Harradine is going to be doing another Harsh Light webinar soon, I think. And so David of Fevered Sleep kind of invited me to participate in their grief series that they were doing. So that was an organization, next week, thanks Sunshine. And that was the first time that I'd seen that, okay, there were like grief-oriented spaces that were happening in the arts, and I was being invited to hold that space. And that was a type of expertise of mine that was being called on. And that's something that I've been rearranging in my head as well, is where knowledge comes from, where expertise comes from. And I've been rooting myself more and more in my family home, in my intergenerational family home. My grandparents are my collaborators. My mum is my collaborator. My friends and my family are the people who I draw on ideas of theory with. And it's a lived theory. So being able to name grief as something that had ongoing relevance for everyone felt really powerful to me. And the more I read about it, the more I thought about it, I was like, we can't have enough grief-oriented spaces. We're all floating in this moment of heartbreak so much of the time. And to be able to recognize that, I think, is a really important thing to offer as artists, as facilitators, as curators, as those of us who kind of, our role is almost to name the unnamed or create spaces to exist that don't exist yet. So yeah, and in relation to what you were saying about facilitating in the current moment, I've kind of gone off wanting to create content or just produce and throw things out there, because we're so bombarded by information right now, and I don't feel particularly drawn to that. I don't think that, for me, it feels like the responsible thing to do. So what I think that I'm trying to do in the spaces that I'm being drawn to are the ones that create a type of experience, that create a feeling, that ignite some sort of like sense of love or safety or care in people. Like this, I do feel really like loved and safe in this type of space. And even though it's all flat screens, I think that there's been like a different type of digital intimacy that I've definitely felt over the past few months. Have you felt that as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and I was saying this to you the other day, like I feel I wasn't really receptive. I think at the beginning of the lockdown period, I was trying to do like I was trying to speculate basically what was going to happen to the art sector. Like I was on furlough and I was thinking, what does this mean? What kind of art sector I'm going to enter into in the autumn period. So I was trying to do the speculative work. And then at the same time, there were all these public Zoom conversations with art directors asking these same questions. What is the state of the institution in the pandemic? How has things changed? Uprising, sorry.
I love your voice of the institution.
That's my personification of the yeah. And I logged into all these talks thinking, I'm gonna, in my speculation, I'm gonna get some answers, and this is gonna help me. I don't know why I was doing this kind of like mental preparation for when I returned to work. I don't know why I was doing that. I think I felt quite insecure, to be honest. I think that's really what pushed me to go to that space. And what I noticed was that everyone was kind of by the way, like I do understand that it was a very and I think it's still happening, no one really knows what's going on, and I think everyone's just trying to just keep keep going and reacting to certain situations without really knowing, like, you know, what's the best thing. I think people are just doing the best that they can. So I am empathetic to that. But I think I was quite disappointed because I wasn't really getting any insights or anything different to what I was speculating. And then because of that, I just kind of became quite, I just stopped being receptive to online events and stuff. And I just decided, so basically the way that I was approaching it was that this is going to be, I'm going to these events to get information to help me be prepared for something. And because that didn't quite happen, and that's not these people's fault, by the way, I was just projecting massively onto that. I don't know why. I decided to take it back and just go back to my research and just really focus on what was really important to me. And at that point was just really, there was two things. Our project, at the time we didn't even know it was going to be a project. I just wanted to get back in touch and like start thinking collectively again with you, because I was thinking, why am I trying to rely on what other people's visions of the future are in order to prepare myself? Maybe actually there's a different way to do it, is actually to ask myself these questions and start envisaging what I want to see. And I know it's a difficult thing to do in such a tough time, but I needed that in order to be optimistic as well, and know that we've got to this place right now that the structures, the art structures in particular, infrastructures, have not, you know, they haven't served us. And we've got to this point right now where they're really at this like breaking point. We keep seeing it manifesting in a number of different ways. So can we then use this opportunity to think of something different? And so not even working, just talking to you, but also talking with some other artists and collaborators to just think and just be in my imagination space and to start thinking like an artist as well. Because I think one thing is that not that I was trained formally as a curator, but I am one now, and I think I immediately start thinking about limitations as a curator, just because of like limitations to do with budget, limitations to do with like health and safety or risk. And so what that means, I limit my own capacity to imagine what can be. And so basically, long answer to your question, it forced me to just ask myself these questions and return to where I want to see the sector to go, and to be more intentional. That's the word. Be more intentional with who I'm in conversation with and who I collaborate with, and where I'm drawing my information from. And I wanted to draw my information from artists and artistic thought. Yeah, don't know whether that answers your question. And also like the thing that drew me to the reason why it was so important to actually start having this particular conversation with you is because what I noticed with your work over the past year is that I don't know whether you consider it curatorial practice anymore, because it's become so expansive. And I was thinking that's the direction that I want to go. And I don't want to just, again, limit myself to an institutional framework. And what I've really enjoyed by watching you is that you have incorporated, you know, a writing practice. You also are doing yoga teacher training. You're also a healer. And so it's just becoming a more all-encompassing and holistic practice. And yeah, I just wanted to know what, you know, again, is that just something that naturally has been happening, and how have you been approaching all of that? And where do you see it going?
I see sunshine pop up.
I am so sorry. I really didn't want to do that, but we should give our signers a break as well. So, but let's end on that little question there. Maybe, Amrita, if you can phrase it the way you wanted to and put it in the chat, and we can start with that for the second part. So amazing conversation. Thank you. We can meet back here at 10 to 8. Is that okay?
Mm-hmm.
So
thank you so much, Catherine and Vicky, as well.
Yeah, thank you as well. Yeah, thank you. See everyone soon. So welcome back. In the second part, we'll find out a bit more about Maybitude now that we've got the scene set, about it as a collective, collaborative practice that emerged from the first lockdown period. And I think for me, it would be interesting to tune into a couple of things, where the word comes from and what it hopes to signal. And also, an additional question is, now that Maybitude came out of a time where loss and grief have both been a bit more welcome, maybe, in this sort of atmosphere. But today, with the news of the vaccine and the optimism that's coming with it a little bit, how do you think that might affect Maybitude, if at all, and more sort of public demonstrations of vulnerability? But that's maybe a little bit of an aside thing, but I'll let you finish your conversation. I just wanted to put it out there because it was in my head. Thanks.
Thank you, Sunshine. Shall I just carry on from the question that you that you asked just before we broke? Broke out. Yeah, so for anyone who wasn't here for the first half and has just joined in the break, I know we've got some loved ones in the room, which is so nice to know. Is Amrita asked a question about my own practice as being quite expansive at this point in relation to how I've thought about curating as something beyond four walls. Those weren't your exact words, but that's just how I heard it, and how I'm starting to do a bit more writing now, and also the healing modalities that I'm kind of initiating myself into. And yeah, just to respond to that, I've been quite disenchanted for a long time with the way things like care have been co-opted and have actually grown quite dry and stale in the mouths of the institution. And I'll go back to my use of the word institution in a bit, but I'm just saying that right now as a marker for something that has a specific tradition. But yeah, I think in my own personal life, there's just been so many, it feels like there's just been so many ups and downs lately in the past like 4 years. And in that, I've felt most sharply that what's most important is looking after myself, and really what well-being means to me as someone who's looked after people who are sick and dying. That's really shifted my own priorities and what I feel I want to put my life behind. So then I think that's been useful for me to think about what direction to move my life into. And I don't know if career is the right word, because I don't know what my career is, but I'm kind of using each thing that I do as just a holding space or a place to gather. Even with the project that we've initiated together, Amrita, I'm kind of just seeing it as a place that I can go in my own mind, not even necessarily that there's an output. But I remember when we were talking about it, it's just the conversation itself is the research. And I think that keeps going back to the everydayness that I try and root myself in, and how every day is changing, and to be responsive to something like that. So yeah, I think given the fact that I realized that for me, the work that I want to do is with bodies and for bodies, and to understand trauma responses and to understand our nervous system, that led me to be more interested in something like yoga, just because I was only drawn to it because it's my own ancestral tradition. And also look at it from a critical and anti-oppressive lens. So that's the work that I hadn't really told anyone about it, but I'm glad that it's part of this conversation now and it's enfolded into this practice. And with writing as well, we both referenced Gloria Anzaldúa, and she's been someone who I read when I'm trying to feel inspired to write, and someone who embodies transformation in her writing, which is something that I am trying to do. I'm trying to see it as a process of inscription and scripture in itself, something that is made as I make it. And I don't know how far, yeah, of course, I'll write it in the chat in a second. Thanks, Tammy.
And one really important quote that, so yeah, for just to kind of contextualize that further, I think we both came to her work relatively at the same time, and the curator, there's nurse, actually introduced me to her work, especially within the lens of what I think Gloria was, she prioritized spiritual activism. And I thought that was quite an interesting thing, because Gloria also brought it into the space of pedagogy, and in a way that's kind of like how it was imparted to us. But yeah, I remember at the beginning of lockdown when we started to have these discussions again, and we'll get to maybe Jude, we'll get there, I promise. But we spoke a lot about Anzaldúa, and we spoke about how Anzaldúa's approach to like art production and writing, I think writing was her main medium, as this gesture of the body. She said that writing is a gesture of the body. And there's one particular quote that we, when we were revisiting her work this week, actually, one particular quote that I wanted to share with you all, and then Priya, we could talk about how we respond to that. And the quote is, "The body is the ground of thought. The body is a text. Writing is not about being in your head, it's about being in your body." And I feel like that's kind of, for both of us, I mean, it's less about writing for me, because that's still something I'm personally thinking about. Is that really the best way for me to express my ideas? But certainly with you, I think it's both, it is a shared goal of ours, this idea of like not being in your head, but being in your body. And yeah, so what does this quote mean to you, essentially?
Yeah, well, so much of the thinking that I keep coming back to is that my body knows, and that it is a rich archive. And even with archives, I'm trying to think about things in a way that's not extractive, that it's something that is done in a very mutual and mutually related way, that there's no loss there. There's always something that is offered. So yeah, I'm trying to think about what our bodies hold, and when we enter into spaces together, what are they telling each other? I've been trying to pay more attention to my nervous system and to understand when I kind of go into this fight or flight mode, or even a freeze state, and how to resource myself in my own body and know how to bring myself back to my baseline. And I think that that's just life skills that I hope I can learn for myself and share with others. I'm learning from really incredible teachers right now as well. And often when I think about that, that's what it comes down to. When we are in a state of fight or flight, it actually affects the inner apparatus of our ears. We're unable to listen to each other as clearly when we're in that state. So what happens when we take ourselves out of that, when we take our nervous system back into like a parasympathetic state? We can hear each other, we can listen to each other, we're resourced in our own safety so we can offer safety to others. And that's something that I keep coming back to when I'm thinking about curating as well, what type of discursive spaces I want to be creating, where it's where we can be wrong, where there's an opportunity to learn, that there's not a reaction, instead it's responsive. So that's what I'm thinking about, and I know it's something that you think about a lot as well. And that, I guess, this is where we think about care and our responsibility. And by the way, this is 2 Capricorns in conversation, so it's like responsibility.
Okay, I get that.
So yeah, and I wonder if now I should mention magnitude as, so it's a word that we've borrowed from Rax Media Collective. They have a video work on YouTube, I think, or it's on Vimeo, called Passwords for Time Travel, where they have made certain words and given them definitions, I guess, almost as portals, or they're seeing language as something that can take us to another place that we haven't imagined before. And their definition of magnitude is the entire spectrum between being, becoming, between becoming and decaying, between decaying and being born. And I guess, I mean, Sunshine said, what does that signal to? And before we started this call, we were having a chat with our BSL interpreters of how we could signal that. And I think this was the signal, that it's like between 2 points. That's how I kind of see it, is that it's this in-betweenness. And in relation to Harsh Light's overarching question about Arts Council England's investment principles, we kind of wanted to think about their principle of dynamism, and the way that they talk about dynamism is, let me see.
I think we established it was quite mechanic.
Yeah, the way that they talked about it, it was the way that a machine would move, the dynamics of a machine, that there were cogs that needed to turn. And I guess you and I were kind of interested in like the messy aspect of moving, the embodied, what it feels like to move. And I guess I'm thinking more of like emergence in the way that I guess Adrienne Maree Brown has popularized, that there's like a responsive adaptability, there's a futurism to it as well, which I know some of your work is rooted in. There's a speculation and imagination there. And that it's almost like the bending of a tree rather than something that's like a robot that can be reprogrammed. Those are some of my thoughts right now on magnitude and dynamism.
I mean, I think it's also important for us to clarify that we really, really are at the very, very early stages of what this project is. And Priya, correct me if I'm wrong, really, again, as Priya mentioned, it's conversations as research. You know, we want to kind of actually transcribe some of these conversations, because I think what we're aiming to do is to just create a new set of terms for ourselves. You know, what we've established, and it's not just us, there's a number of people within the sector. The set of terms, the language, the framework, the overall paradigm in which we're operating right now is not only outmoded and based on a very, I guess, a colonial precedence as well, but also it's, as I mentioned before, it's limiting. And I think, I don't know whether it's to do with the fact that neither of us sort of like studied curating like academically. I don't know whether it's got anything to do with that. But I think for us now, what we feel like the next stage in our practice is to actually create our own framework, our own set of terms. And that's like why I was so excited to have these conversations with you in particular, because you have this gift of and sensitivity to words that I don't necessarily have. Well, that's what I'm aiming to develop, to be fair. And I think that that's kind of like what we're aiming towards, and what we would and what you were saying earlier, it may not be anything that we publish. It might just be for us. It might just be literally a set of terms that we create, so we can just step out of these current infrastructures, and to just embody a new school of thought, which we can then sort of see enter into our practices in different places. We haven't really, thought that far into it. And we have actually started a little glossary where we've actually, we haven't created new terms, but we're trying to revise terms that are actually important to us. So things like, as you mentioned, emergence, or collaboration, or organicism, and things like that we want to center into our practices. But I also wanted to ask you, like, why do you think, firstly, do you actually agree with my own interpretation of our practice? Do you think it is this like rewriting of an artistic framework as a gesture of the body? That's one question. And also, like, why do you think it's important that we do this now? And what do you envisage from this work? I have my own answers to that, but I'm curious as to what you think about it.
I mean, I think that any projects or any collaboration that I'm doing with people is just like a different headspace to be able to occupy, and that's the way that I'm seeing this as well. I've really been through the motions of like feeling overwhelmed and overcommitted to certain things, or not being able to manage the different timelines that things operate on, or the different like affect it requires of me. But that's why just working with loved ones feels great, because there's just an openness and understanding as natural, as given. So yeah, I guess I agree with you that I'm not really seeing it as like there's a beginning or an end to it. I think it's just been it's kind of born out of our coming together and thinking aloud together, and us saying that there are these words that we're hearing people use. Some of it feels resonant and some of it doesn't feel resonant. How can we build up a archive, or like a stock or an inventory that we can draw from, that feels like our toolbox, or it feels like a resource to us, so we're not always like reinventing the wheel and we're having to like start again, but we're coming from like a place of possibility. And that's how it feels to be imagining with you.
And I think one thing that I've forgotten about it, but it's just kind of, I think maybe just because you mentioned it again, like the fact that we've taken that term from a piece called Passwords for Time Travel. And that's something also that we've been thinking about, is like these, time traveling in a sense is also part of how we practice. And one thing that you mentioned about my work, again, futurism is part of that. And like, so whilst we were having this discussion about magnitudes, I was also having a discussion with two people in the audience right now, a curator called Helen Starr and an artist called Salma Noor. And we were having a conversation about ethnofuturisms, the legacy of the various movements situated across the world. And we were thinking about, in this mode of thinking, we were thinking about, what it means to create another sort of futurist strand, but one that ties or thinks about the pre-colonial connections between our own ancestral lands. So we're going way, way back. And we, you know, so it's called Dad, futurism. And Dad was a term that Salma brought into the conversation. And Dad is a Somali term. It is, and this is a bad English translation, so I'm sorry, Salma, if I'm butchering this, but it's like the notion of something like overflowing or spilling or flooding or like rain, but also you can describe someone as Dad, as I think they're like a jet setter, or they're like moving around. So there is this like embrace of like the fluidity and the movement between us, but also a natural, like I said, a pre-colonial movement. And one amazing discovery that Helen made was back in the day, you know, we also started thinking about how the natural elements participate in this, and like we were really inspired by the work of Himali Singh Soin, who she has created her own manifesto, a South Asian manifesto, futurist manifesto rather, and her research is brilliant because it talks about these natural telecommunications between the poles, the Arctic pole, North and South Pole, and other poles in the world as well, and how they've affected her ancestral archive. And then in that same vein, Helen did research where she discovered again, like there's like the movement of sand that came from East Africa, which is where Salma's ancestry lies. You know, kind of traveled to North India, affected the monsoon season, and at the same time traveled to the Amazon and affected, and impacted the soil there. And Helen, her ancestry is in Trinidad and mine is in North India. I was like, how the hell did she come to find this? And it's like incredible that she did this research. Actually, I just want to share very quickly before we have to move on some, I will, some visualizations of this research that we started doing together, because the visualization that Salma has done is part of how we are processing and working together in this futurist movement. So let me just quickly show you, because they are brilliant. Sorry, I'm putting Salma and Helen on the spot here, but they need to know that this has just been so informative to this moment, and also influence how I'm speaking to you about magnitudes, and again this importance of time travel in us reconceiving, not just looking to the future but looking to the past at the same time. So these are just some incredible stills that Salma has digitally composed, just gorgeous. And hopefully this works. There's also, so these are stills that then she has embedded into a GIF. But yeah, so like I said, and it's quite interesting because when I was rereading Dhallu's approach to thinking about border art and the borderlands, it's not meant to be white. Let's just let it load for a bit. She also, in her process of writing, she was also doing these amazing, illustrations of like processes that she's conceiving of and terms, and the visualization was very much I don't know whether anyone can see that, again thinking about all of these creative processes that she is embodying and also discovering, and also how all of these strands have helped her to think about how to repair past damage, whether that's when I speak about repair, I think about like colonial damage and colonial wounds in relation to Kader Atiyeh's proposition. And I think it's the same with Dhallu's work as well. So yeah, how like time travel is like the suture suture for that wound is quite interesting.
Do you see ritual as well as part of that?
I think
as part of that suturing.
Definitely. And I think in relation to Dad futurism, one thing that we speak a lot about is rhythm, and how rhythm is a part of that ritual, and how sonic, when I'd say the sonic, and I don't mean like sonic art, I mean like sound and music and poetry. So not even necessarily the visual, but how all of these, strands of art from our ancestors, and thinking about that in relation to this work is also part of that.
It's like a sensory experience.
Yeah, exactly. The sensory experience, and how we also we've been conditioned to kind of move away from that, especially in the art sector as well. I've noticed that, even with like the rigorous categorization of arts, like visual arts, music, literature, for us back in the day, they all kind of informed one another. And I think part of, even though this is a futurist movement, we are trying to return back to that and bringing it all into how we conceive of this. But at the same time, with Helen's expertise as well, Helen's expertise is in augmented reality and virtual reality. So connecting it to that ritual is just, it's an exciting place to be, and to participate in, and also learn about all of those things as well, and not to think that the digital is so far from all of those experiences. They can be brought in a really fantastic and invigorating way. And also, like, I think about, ritual is so present in your work as well, and I don't know whether your yoga practice kind of comes into that, or how you perceive your yoga practice.
Yeah, well, my perception of my yoga practice is just like changing, and it's pretty wounded. Actually, it started out being pretty wounded, and it still is. But I guess there's a futurist element to the way that I'm trying to approach it as well. I'm trying to think about what serves and what doesn't serve, and what do I want to carry into the future in my body, and what I want to leave behind, and things that I actually can't leave behind, and things that I should address in relation to caste and class privileges as well, that it's actually my responsibility to like step up and name certain things in the body that I have right now. So I think in terms of ritual, I've been doing my own like practice in my own room, in my tiny little shrine that I've created for myself on my windowsill, just as a way of recalibrating every day, and just to check in with how my mind is different each day. Because I think that's one of the colonial violences that we all face, is that this need for certainty and a need for a clear arc of progression that has damaged all of us, and it dehumanizes all of us. So I think for me, checking in with myself and noticing how I'm different each day has been a really important process. And I think ritual in like a group environment as well is something that I've been part of with my family. I'm trying to think about the ways that I carry certain traditions forward, and the way that within the diaspora things look different as well, or feel different. So yeah, I actually wanted to ask you, I know we're just closing, let me just see the chat. Yeah, if anyone has any questions, we'd love to hear, or just comments and thoughts on how you're feeling, or how any of this is landing with you. But I actually wanted to ask you, Amrita, how, like, what your body tells you when you do the work that you do.
That I need to do more checking in with myself. But embarking on our collaboration and embarking on Dad futurism wherever either of those things will take me, my body told me like that was the right thing to do at that time. Because like I told you, I was in a place where I was checking in on all the Zoom talks, trying to get that information. And again, this idea of certainty, exactly what you're saying, that wasn't serving me. And I was really, you know, spinning out because I wasn't getting the answers that I wanted to reassure myself. So I think that what I've learned is that I have needed to be, you know, I've needed to reconnect with my own imagination, because a lot of work that I was doing prior to that moment was a lot about facilitation and creating spaces and perhaps prioritizing the needs of others over, and not thinking that actually I have my own creative ideas and research that I want to pursue. And that's not also to denigrate that work, because that's really important work, and I'm really grateful of all the networks that I've been a part of. But I think I needed to just kind of take a break to think about what is it that I have to say, not necessarily about this moment, but just generally what is my life's work. And yeah, so I think I'm really glad that I took that moment to not get too carried away and say, okay, there's these two creative processes that I really want to undertake that is going to lead me not necessarily to a place of certainty, but just actually to a creative fulfillment, and actually engage myself in a completely different way, but also challenging as well. And I can see how both of those has infiltrated like even my day job, and infiltrated like my contributions at my day job, for example, or like how I'm reading other artists' work in a way that is completely transformed how I'm reading a lot of artists' work, actually, which is really interesting to see. And the energy that I can then provide to those projects as well. Yeah. But I also really like the idea of Magnitude also being a process of we're just checking in more. And that actually just being something that is a regular part of our practices. And I also appreciated Sunshine starting actually the conversation with a check-in. So I think that's a nice way to wrap it up or open it up.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, checking in. I just don't feel like we ask that question enough anyway. How do we feel? How are we doing? How are we feeling? In a lot of work contexts, it's a funny question, and it's quite a big question right now anyway, but it's still a very necessary one to try and break down, and it's something that Harshlight, I hope, is a platform for us to try and do it gently and find out the strands of the question, because it's such a big one. But yeah, maybe we can just take this last question that came in from Luminara Star. What reactions have Amrita and Priya received to their ideas and work from the art world? Yeah. Is it? Yeah, I mean, this Magnitude being so fresh and something that, you know, I think Amrita, you said earlier, maybe it's just something that you want to keep between you as well as a way of checking in. Wonder how, is this kind of basically the first time you've presented it in a more sort of art context?
Yes and no. No being the fact that like what we didn't say is that the actual motivation, like the initial motivation of us doing this, is because we were responding to an open call. And the open call was to, what was it, like to publish like research as a
conversation, yeah,
research thing. And I was like, Priya, we chat all the time. I think this is research. So let's do this application and let's just think about it. And I mean, in a way, like, so, you know, this is an extension of that initial motivation. But actually, what's been great is that, so we didn't get the opportunity, but we really invested in what we had started, that conversation we had started. And now it's like, you know, if we got that open call, that conversation may have just been like a response to that open call, and then we would have left it. But what I've liked now is that it actually has become a prolonged thing. We check it in terms of this project. We check in like once, like we talk regularly, but in terms of that project, we maybe talk like once a month or once every 2 months. It's really like we've stretched it out to just really think about actually what is this. And I think it's enabled us to have time to get back to our books, to get back to our distant mentors, to get back to all of our influences, and to really consolidate all of that. Because I think one that I remember you asked me, Priya, ages ago, because we're also doing on top of all of this, we're also doing our own research projects. We have funded research opportunities, which is brilliant. One thing you asked me was like, well, how do you want to see your research play out in your practice? Like, are you going to write a paper, or are you going to, produce something? And like what I've appreciated with Magnitude, and like I said earlier, is that I can just see it just naturally infiltrate into how I just operate within these spaces. And that's what I'm really proud to say, is that output. And I can see it with this. And to specifically answer to Luminara, and then I'll let you respond, sorry. I just don't think we're really, was there reactions? I mean, yeah, we just haven't really been putting it out there like this. This is our first, space to talk about it publicly. But like we also said at the beginning, this conversation we've just had is now going to just feed into the next step, whatever that is. I just don't think we really care about what the other world has to think about it, because it's for us. It's about how our own progress and how we relate not only to one another, but to everyone else and who we choose to collaborate with. Yeah.
I guess for me, just to add my little piece onto the end of that, is that I just really appreciated this opportunity as a clarifying moment. And I think I've been so overwhelmed in the past by the arbitrariness and the randomness of my career trajectory in the art world, where it could have gone in any sort of direction depending on who decided to give me a chance. And I'm sure so many people relate to this when you're out there applying for like so many different jobs. I could have been like an ethnographic museum curator if one of my applications had gone through. I could have been like a podcast producer if another one had gone through. Like, there's so many different possible avenues that these things can manifest in. So I think the thing that brings me peace is when I'm making things, when I'm choosing to work with certain people, I'm using it as an opportunity to clarify thought with another person. So even in the lead up to this conversation, it was an opportunity for me to bring certain things together in my own mind. It was a really good exercise for me. Sorry, my grandma, my granddad and my mom are talking outside my room, if anyone else can hear that. But also in terms of writing my bio, which is such an anxiety-inducing exercise, I'm trying to think about it as a prophecy, that what I'm trying to project into the world, project outwards, not kind of like as a miniature CV, but as the work that I want to be doing. So I think that that's the way that I'm using this and broadly my practice as a way of navigating this world that often leads us to be quite performative. So yeah, that's, and I think it's pretty well received right now. I don't have a permanent job, so I'm cruising through on my own terms and clarifying my own ethics. So that works for me right now, and I'm blessed to be able to live with my family to be able to do that. So yeah, that's my little piece in relation to the question.
And it just reminds me again, it's like, yes, I think the importance of this work that we're embarking on, and not just this. I think there's a lot of people who are doing that, and I really appreciate seeing it because it's very inspirational. Is that the idea of setting our own terms, knowing again that this our infrastructure at its breaking point, then what, we can't, we can't rely on that anymore to serve us. But what does it mean to set our own terms at this point? And again, like, who would have share that embarrassing story with you all about my desperation to get the answers from the, the almighty above, and I wasn't getting it. And my response to that was, well, I need to ask my own questions about where I want to go. And again, someone's just taken that quote from you, bio as prophecy. That's kind of like how I'm trying to use this time is, what is it I want to set out for myself? And it's so much less intimidating and alienating to do when I'm in conversation with other people, whether it's you, whether it's Salma and Helen, and whether it's with our peers.
Shout all the pairs.
All of them, and our mentors and our teachers. I'm so grateful that I've, in this really difficult time, I've been able to reach out to every one of you, and it feels like a possible thing to do. Before it was like, fuck, the only way to make this happen is to just job after job after job. Actually, is there another way to do this? But of course there's the circumstances, finances, and all of that has to be taken into consideration. So I'm not living in this cloud cuckoo world, but I just feel like it's more possible now, and that's why it's so important for me to keep reaching out to you all. And I'm really glad that we can be honest about that with everyone else who's here and joining us today as well. I think we're not.
Oh no, it's always too short. But just to echo some of the comments in the chat, it just felt like such an expansive conversation involving friendship and working with each other, and really a sense of support and co-mentorship that's really come through in your conversation, that I feel happens anyway in the art world a lot of times, but never gets or doesn't get enough kind of visibility or criticality around it, kind of what this actually produces. And so thank you so much for using this platform to do what you normally do anyway, and for us to and allowing us to kind of witness this and listen in. It's felt just really lovely and intimate, and so we've really appreciated that. So as Dave says, there is a form. Yes, there is a form, but we do take all your comments really seriously, and helping shape what is becoming like a really great platform, both for ourselves as art workers, and as far as we can tell for other people coming as well. They've been really finding this a great space. So whatever you if you have the time, it would be really great for to hear your feedback.